Hello and welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. We're grateful for each view and comment. Tell us, from which country or city are you watching today? We enjoy connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Shadows Behind Success. Dominic Navarro never considered himself lucky until the day he met Bianca. The boardroom of Stafford Financial Holdings buzzed with tension that morning. 7 investment bankers sat with perfectly tailored suits and practiced smiles, each hoping to secure the management contract for Gilbert Stafford's newly acquired tech portfolio. Mr. Navarro, your presentation was unconventional, Gilbert said, leaning forward in his chair, gold cufflinks catching the light. Everyone else showed me projections of double-digit returns. You showed me risks. What? Dominic maintained eye contact. Because anyone promising guaranteed returns is either lying to you or to themselves, Mr. Stafford. I prefer honesty from the start. A woman sitting at Gilbert's right, whom Dominic hadn't noticed until now, smiled. Her honey blonde hair framed a face that combined her father's calculating eyes with something far more magnetic. She whispered something to Gilbert. My daughter thinks you're either brave or stupid, Gilbert said. I'm inclined to agree with her first assessment. The contract is yours. That was 5 years ago. Now, Dominic stood in their palatial home, watching Bianca direct the catering staff for his 40th birthday party. Their marriage had followed a whirlwind romance that surprised the financial district. No one had expected Gilbert Stafford's daughter to marry someone who had risen from nothing, a self-made financial advisor with no family connections whose past before his MBA remained mysteriously blank. You're staring again, Bianca said without turning, somehow sensing his gaze. Just admiring my extraordinary luck, Dominic replied. She finally turned, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Save the charm for the guests, Dom. My father's bringing some important clients. Something in her tone sent an imperceptible chill through him. For months now, little moments like these had been accumulating, subtle changes in her behavior that his analytical mind couldn't help but catalog. Shorter conversations, decreased physical affection, late nights at the office, texts she hid from view. His phone vibrated. A message from Theo Russell, his former Army Ranger teammate and now head of cybersecurity at Dominic's private investment firm. Need to talk. Found something. Not good. Dominic pocketed his phone. Whatever it was would have to wait. Tonight was about maintaining appearances, a skill he'd perfected long before meeting the Staffords. What Gilbert Stafford saw in Dominic was a brilliant financial mind. What he failed to see was the man beneath. The orphan who'd enlisted at 18, been recruited for special operations at 20, and spent 8 years conducting classified missions before building a new identity in the financial world. His background wasn't merely blank, it was deliberately erased. As guests began arriving, Dominic played his role perfectly, the charming, successful son-in-law. Yet he couldn't help noticing how his wife seemed to vibrate with nervous energy, checking her watch repeatedly. Expecting someone? He asked casually when she glanced at the door for the 5th time. Just wondering where Dad is, she replied quickly. He's never late. When Gilbert finally arrived, he wasn't alone. A tall man with copper hair and a confident swagger followed behind him. Dominic recognized him immediately. Preston Winters, Bianca's college boyfriend, and a former executive at Stafford Holdings who'd left for a competitor 3 years ago. Dominic, Gilbert boomed, clapping him on the shoulder with uncharacteristic warmth. Happy birthday, son. You remember Preston? Of course. Of course, Dominic replied evenly, extending his hand. It's been a while. Preston's grip was unnecessarily firm. Too long. Congratulations on all your success, Dominic. You've done well for yourself. His eyes flicked toward Bianca, who was suddenly very interested in her champagne glass. Preston's rejoining the company, Gilbert announced. We've been in talks for months. Quite secretly, I might add. He laughed as though this was tremendously amusing. Dominic's face remained pleasant, betraying none of the warning signals firing in his mind. What position? He asked casually. Gilbert and Preston exchanged glances. We'll discuss business tomorrow, Gilbert said dismissively. Tonight is for celebration. As the evening progressed, Dominic noted how Bianca and Preston seemed to communicate in a private language of glances and subtle gestures. His instincts, honed through years of operating in hostile territory, screamed that something was very wrong. Just after midnight, as the last guests departed, Dominic found Bianca in the study with her father and Preston. Their conversation ceased abruptly when he entered. Perfect timing, Gilbert said with an unnatural smile. We were just discussing tomorrow's board meeting. On my birthday? Dominic asked lightly. I'm flattered. No one laughed. Later that night, lying beside his silent wife, Dominic finally read Theo's encrypted message. They've been planning this for months. B has been transferring assets. P returned 2 months ago. They meet at the Princeton Hotel every Tuesday. I have everything documented. Call me. Dominic closed his eyes, his mind methodically cataloging every betrayal indicator he'd noticed but dismissed. The coincidences that weren't coincidences. The meetings she never detailed. The subtle changes in behavior. In the darkness, he allowed himself a small, dangerous smile. They had no idea what they had awakened. Chapter 2. The Masks We Wear. The morning after his birthday party, Dominic rose before dawn, leaving Bianca asleep in their bed. He drove to his private office downtown, not the one at Stafford Holdings, but his own space where he conducted his most sensitive business. Theo Russell was waiting, his massive frame looking incongruous behind the sleek desk. Once the most feared combat specialist in their unit, Theo now hid his lethal abilities behind designer suits and cybersecurity credentials. How bad? Dominic asked, skipping pleasantries. Theo slid a tablet across the desk. They've been methodical. Bianca's been meeting Preston for 6 months. Gilbert brought him back 3 months ago as a consultant. They've been transferring control of your joint assets gradually. The board votes today to install Preston as Chief Investment Officer, your position. There's a prenup clause about professional misconduct they're planning to trigger. Dominic scrolled through surveillance photos, text messages, and financial records. His face revealed nothing, but his eyes grew colder with each swipe. You weren't surprised, Theo observed. I suspected. Confirmation is clarifying. Dominic set down the tablet. What else? Gilbert's been bad-mouthing your investment strategies to the board for weeks. They've manipulated 3 of your client portfolios to show losses. And this, Theo handed him a document. Divorce papers, already prepared. They're planning something at the board meeting. Dominic examined the papers, noting how thoroughly they'd planned to strip him of everything. They want to humiliate me professionally, then personally. What's our play? Theo asked. Dominic leaned back. First, we secure what's mine. Transfer everything from our contingency structures. Second, I attend the board meeting as if I know nothing. And third, a cold smile crossed Dominic's face. I start dismantling their lives piece by piece. The Stafford Holdings boardroom hummed with subdued energy when Dominic entered. Gilbert sat at the head of the table, Preston to his right, where Dominic usually sat. Bianca was present, unusual for these meetings, seated beside Preston. Dominic, Gilbert acknowledged coldly. We've already begun. Dominic took the only remaining seat, at the far end of the table, away from the power position. By all means, continue. Gilbert cleared his throat. As I was saying, our portfolio performance under current management has been concerning. Preston has presented an alternative strategy that the board finds compelling. For the next hour, Dominic watched Preston present deliberately manipulated data from his accounts. 3 major portfolios showed significant losses, portfolios that Dominic knew were actually performing well above market averages. When Preston finished, Gilbert turned to Dominic. Do you have anything to add? Just a question, Dominic said calmly. When did you decide Preston would make a better son-in-law than me? The room went silent. Gilbert's face flushed. This is about business, not personal matters. Is it? Dominic stood, buttoning his jacket. Then you won't mind explaining why portfolio performance data has been falsified, or why client funds were moved without authorization to create artificial losses. That's absurd, Preston snapped. Dominic ignored him, addressing the board. Check the transaction logs. Compare them with the official reports filed with regulators. Someone has been manipulating data, a federal offense, as you all know. Gilbert's face reddened further. These accusations are verifiable, Dominic interrupted. I've already submitted evidence to our compliance department and the SEC. But don't worry, I've made it clear that the board wasn't aware of these irregularities. The board members exchanged alarmed glances. This meeting is adjourned, Gilbert announced sharply. Dominic, my office. Now, in Gilbert's office, the older man's facade cracked completely. You ungrateful bastard. I made you. Without my connections, you'd be nothing. Dominic remained perfectly calm. Is that what you think? I know it, Gilbert spat. You were nobody when Bianca found you. A charity case with a good head for numbers. Everything you have is because of us. Interesting perspective, Dominic replied. Is that why you feel entitled to take it all away? Gilbert moved closer, jabbing a finger at Dominic's chest. The board will side with me. They always do. By tomorrow, you'll be finished in this industry. Perhaps, Dominic conceded. But ask yourself this. How much do you really know about the man you invited into your family? The man you're now threatening. His voice dropped to a near whisper. What if I'm not who you think I am? Something in Dominic's eyes made Gilbert step back. You're bluffing, Gilbert said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. We'll see. Dominic turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. When you and Bianca choreographed this little coup, did either of you remember that tonight was my birthday dinner? The reservation at Le Cirque? Just curious. He left Gilbert staring after him, the first seeds of doubt planted. On his drive home, Dominic received a text from Bianca. Where are you? We need to talk. I'll be home soon, he replied. I think it's time we were honest with each other. Chapter 3. The Fall. Dominic arrived home to find Bianca pacing nervously in their living room, still dressed in her boardroom attire. When she saw him, her expression shifted from anxiety to cold determination. Dad called, she said without preamble. You've made some serious accusations. Not accusations. Facts. Dominic loosened his tie, but remained standing. Though I'm curious which version of events he shared with you. Bianca's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her crossed arms. He said you're threatening to go to the authorities with fabricated evidence. That you're trying to sabotage Preston's promotion because you're jealous. Jealous, Dominic repeated flatly. Of the man you've been sleeping with behind my back for 6 months? That would be redundant, don't you think? Her face paled slightly before she recovered. Don't be ridiculous. The Princeton Hotel. Tuesdays at lunch. Sometimes Fridays after work if I was traveling. He removed his jacket and draped it over a chair. Should I continue, or are we past the denial stage? Bianca's mask slipped, genuine surprise flickering across her features before her expression hardened. You had me followed? That's expected, Dominic finished for her. Given what I've discovered about the systematic effort to undermine my position and steal my clients. He poured himself a drink. What I'm still trying to understand is why the charade. Why not just divorce me months ago? She hesitated, calculation visible behind her eyes. It's complicated. No, it's quite simple, Dominic corrected. My name opened doors for you and Preston that would have remained closed otherwise. My client relationships built your father's tech portfolio. You needed to secure those connections before discarding me. The doorbell rang before she could respond. Gilbert and Preston stood outside, both looking grim. Perfect timing, Dominic said, gesturing them in. We were just getting to the interesting part. Gilbert strode in, radiating fury. Preston followed, his posture suggesting he was ready for confrontation. You think you're clever, Gilbert snarled. But you're out of your depth. The board has called an emergency session for tomorrow. With one vote, you'll be removed and barred from the industry with a reputation so tarnished you'll never work in finance again. Dominic smiled slightly. Is that before or after the SEC reviews the evidence of portfolio manipulation? Because their investigation might take precedence. There is no evidence, Preston interjected. Your baseless accusations. Theo sent quite a comprehensive file to our compliance department this morning, Dominic interrupted. Including the original transaction records you thought you'd erased. Fascinating reading. Gilbert's face flushed darker. This is your final warning. Back down, resign quietly, and we might let you walk away with something. Bianca moved to stand beside her father and Preston, forming a united front. With deliberate timing, she reached into her bag and produced an envelope, which she thrust toward Dominic. My wife handed me divorce papers at my birthday party. You should have seen this coming, she said, her voice cold. Dominic took the envelope without opening it. And this is how you chose to do it? Not in private, but as a performance? We're done. Dad's promoting my EX in your place, she laughed coldly. Pack your trash. Gilbert nodded in agreement. Clean out your desk tomorrow. Dominic looked at each of them in turn, his expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate calm, He placed the unopened divorce papers on the coffee table and walked to the bar to refresh his drink. Nothing to say? Preston taunted. Oh, I have plenty to say, Dominic replied. But actions speak louder, don't they? So instead, I'll simply inform you that as of this morning, I no longer work for Stafford Holdings. Gilbert scoffed. You can't quit. You're fired. Semantics, Dominic shrugged. More importantly, as of 30 minutes ago, Wilcox Capital has acquired controlling interest in McAllister Technologies, Vanguard Dynamics, and Brightway Systems. The color drained from Gilbert's face. That's impossible. Those are our three largest tech holdings. Dominic corrected. Their boards voted unanimously for the acquisition after learning about certain irregularities in Stafford's management. Curiously, those were the same three portfolios showing artificial losses. Did you really think the CEOs wouldn't take my calls when you started manipulating their stock values? Gilbert seemed to age before their eyes. You can't do this. Those accounts represent 40% of our holdings. 37.6, to be precise, Dominic said. But who's counting? He finished his drink and set down the glass. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have dinner plans. This isn't over, Bianca hissed. Dominic paused at the doorway. You're right about that. It's just beginning. His gaze swept over them one last time. You might want to check your phones in the morning. The financial press will be quite busy. They left me standing alone in what had been our home. I watched through the security cameras as they huddled in Gilbert's car, frantically making calls. Already, their carefully constructed plan was unraveling. At midnight, I powered down my phone, knowing what would follow. By morning, the financial world would learn of Stafford Holdings' massive losses. By afternoon, the SEC would announce its investigation. And by evening, they would finally understand who they had betrayed. But for now, I had a different appointment. Theo was waiting at our secure facility with everything we needed for the next phase. They still have no idea who you really are, do they? He asked as I entered. No, I replied. But they will. Chapter 4. The Man Behind the Mask. 3 days passed without Dominic answering his phone. In that time, the financial world erupted in chaos for the Stafford family. The SEC announced a formal investigation into Stafford Holdings. The company's stock plummeted 40%. Major clients withdrew their business. And throughout it all, Dominic Navarro remained conspicuously absent. In his secure facility, a converted warehouse in an industrial district, Dominic monitored everything through a sophisticated communications center. Theo managed a team of 6 operatives, all former military specialists who had served with them. Bianca has called 23 times, Theo reported, glancing at the monitor. Gilbert, 34. Preston, 16. Multiple voice messages on all your numbers. Dominic nodded, studying the surveillance feeds showing Stafford Holdings headquarters, where SEC agents were currently removing boxes of documents. Another screen showed Gilbert arriving at his attorney's office, looking haggard. The prenup had a morality clause, Maya Rodriguez said, entering the room with a tablet. Once an intelligence analyst, Maya now handled digital surveillance for Dominic's operation. Bianca's infidelity voids most of her protections. Your lawyer confirms the divorce can proceed on your terms. And the property transfers? Dominic asked. Reversed, Maya confirmed. The attempt to move your joint assets triggered fraud alerts. Everything's frozen pending investigation. Dominic turned to a wall map displaying his global assets, properties, businesses, and financial holdings that the Staffords had never known existed. Before meeting Bianca, he had built a substantial fortune through his private investment firm, Axiom Capital, operating under a web of shell corporations and trusts. What's our position in Asian markets? He asked Dennis Walsh, his international finance specialist. We've absorbed the initial shockwaves. Our Singapore office reports all holdings secure. The Chang Group has agreed to your proposed partnership. Dominic nodded. And the Stafford vulnerability assessment. Maya swiped through several screens. Gilbert's heavily leveraged. 3 of his properties have second mortgages. His yacht is financed. Without the tech portfolio, he'll struggle to meet obligations. Preston has significant gambling debts in Vegas and Macau, approximately $3 million. Bianca's personal accounts show regular transfers to a hidden account in the Caymans. Current balance, $12 million. Money she skimmed from our joint accounts, Dominic noted. Prepare the documentation for the prosecutors. The facility door opened, and a distinguished older man entered. Victor Castillo, once the handler for Dominic's special operations team, now served as his chief strategist. "They're getting desperate," Victor said without preamble. "Gilbert tried to contact our mutual friends at the State Department. He's looking for leverage against you." Dominic smiled slightly. "And they denied knowing you personally. Officially, you're just another financial advisor." As expected, Dominic turned back to the monitors. "What about the offshore accounts? We've tracked the money trail from Stafford Holdings through 7 shell companies. They've been systematically draining corporate assets for years, at least 80 million diverted to private accounts. The documentation is being anonymously delivered to the SEC tomorrow." "Good." Dominic checked his watch. It's time for phase 2. He activated a secure phone that hadn't been used in 5 years and dialed Gilbert Stafford's private line. Gilbert answered immediately. "Dominic? Where the hell have you been? Do you have any idea what's happening?" "I have a fairly comprehensive understanding," Dominic replied calmly. "How are you holding up, Gilbert?" "Cut the crap. The SEC is crawling through my offices. 3 major clients have withdrawn their portfolios. The board is calling for my resignation. You need to fix this." "Fix what exactly? The fraudulent transactions you approved? The client manipulations? Or perhaps your daughter's infidelity?" Gilbert's voice lowered to a growl. "Listen to me, you ungrateful bastard. I don't know what game you're playing, but—" "No games," Dominic interrupted. "Just consequences. Though I am curious about something. When you brought Preston back, did you investigate where he'd been for the past 3 years? A pause. "What are you talking about?" "His time with Meridian Capital. His sudden departure. The client funds that disappeared. It's all quite fascinating reading." "You're bluffing," Gilbert said, but uncertainty tinged his voice. "Am I? Perhaps you should ask him about the Liechtenstein accounts. Or don't. The federal prosecutors will be asking soon enough." Gilbert's breathing became audible. "What do you want?" "Nothing you can provide," Dominic replied. "Check your email in 10 minutes. You'll find something interesting." He ended the call and nodded to Maya, who sent the prepared email containing detailed evidence of Preston's past financial crimes, complete with account numbers and transaction records. "How long before he calls Preston?" Theo asked. 5 minutes, Dominic predicted. "How many messages have they left now?" 78. 3 days later, panicked voicemails. 78 of them after realizing who really I was. Dominic allowed himself a small, cold smile. It's time they learned. Get the car ready. He had spent 5 years crafting the perfect image for the Staffords, the brilliant but conventional financial advisor, the dutiful son-in-law, the man who seemed to have no past before his MBA. Now it was time to reveal the truth. An hour later, Dominic walked into Stafford Holdings for the first time since his birthday. Security guards looked uncertain whether to stop him, their instructions contradicted by the sheer confidence with which he moved through the building. He took the executive elevator to the top floor, where Bianca, Gilbert, and Preston were huddled in Gilbert's office. Their conversation stopped abruptly when he entered. "Dominic," Bianca breathed, standing quickly. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide her lack of sleep. "Where have you been? We've been trying to reach you for days." "I'm aware," he replied, remaining by the door. 78 messages. Quite persistent. Gilbert looked as though he'd aged a decade. "Did you send those files?" "About Preston?" Preston's face contorted with rage. "Whatever he sent you is fabricated. He's trying to drive a wedge between us." "The Liechtenstein accounts aren't fabricated," Dominic said mildly. "Neither are the transactions you authorized using client funds. The regulatory authorities in 3 countries have been building that case for 2 years." "You son of a bitch!" Preston lunged forward, but Dominic sidestepped easily, and Preston stumbled against the desk. "Physical confrontation, Preston? Is that your solution?" Dominic straightened his cuffs. "How disappointing." Bianca stepped forward, her expression shifting to one he recognized, the calculated charm she employed when manipulating situations to her advantage. "Dominic, please," she said, her voice softening. "This has all spiraled out of control. We need to talk privately." "We are talking," he replied. "Though I'm curious, what changed? 3 days ago, you were quite confident in your decision to end our marriage." "The situation has changed," Gilbert interjected. "We can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "Benefits everyone? You tried to steal my clients, ruin my professional reputation, and humiliate me personally. What possible arrangement could address that? Gilbert wiped sweat from his brow. The board is meeting tomorrow. They want someone to blame for this mess. It doesn't have to be me. You could return as CEO. Preston would be gone. You'd have complete control. And what about the divorce? Dominic asked, looking at Bianca. She hesitated. We could reconsider. We've had 5 good years, Dominic. One mistake shouldn't erase that. One mistake, Dominic repeated. Is that how you characterize 6 months of deception? Or the systematic effort to undermine my position? Or perhaps the theft of joint assets? Bianca paled. I don't know what you're talking about. The Cayman account. $12 million transferred gradually over 2 years. He turned to Gilbert. Did you know your daughter was planning to disappear with Preston once I was discredited? The property purchases in Buenos Aires suggest a well-planned exit strategy. Gilbert's shocked expression answered the question. Dominic continued calmly. You never really knew me. Any of you. You saw what I wanted you to see. A capable financial advisor with a convenient lack of family connections. Did you never wonder why a man with my abilities would settle for a mid-level position in your mediocre company? What are you saying? Gilbert demanded. I'm saying that before I built Axiom Capital. Yes, that Axiom Capital, with offices in 11 countries. I spent 8 years in special operations conducting missions you'll never read about. I'm saying that the man you tried to destroy has resources you cannot begin to comprehend. The room fell silent. Why? Bianca finally asked. If you had all that, why marry me? Why work for my father? Dominic's expression softened momentarily. Because 5 years ago, I believed you were different. I believed what we had was real. His eyes hardened again. A miscalculation on my part. He turned to leave, then paused. The board meeting tomorrow will proceed without any of you. The evidence of financial impropriety has been provided to every board member. By this time tomorrow, Stafford Holdings will have new leadership. You can't do this, Gilbert shouted. This company is my life's work. You should have considered that before you tried to take mine, Dominic replied. And Gilbert, those offshore accounts you've been filling for years? The authorities are particularly interested in the source of those funds. As he walked away, Bianca rushed after him. Dominic, wait. Whatever you think happened, we can fix this. He turned, studying her face. Once so beloved, now revealing the calculation behind her beauty. There's nothing to fix, Bianca. It's already done. Chapter 5, The Spider's Web. The following morning, national business headlines announced the shocking news. Gilbert Stafford had resigned as CEO of Stafford Holdings amid allegations of financial impropriety. The board had appointed an interim leadership team pending a full investigation. The company's stock plummeted another 15%. In Dominic's secure facility, Maya updated the team on developments. Preston Winters was detained at Teterboro Airport attempting to leave the country. Federal agents seized his passport and electronic devices. Bianca has withdrawn to the Stafford estate in Greenwich. Gilbert is meeting with attorneys. Dominic nodded, reviewing the latest financial reports. What's our position in Stafford Holdings now? Through Proxy Holdings, we control 23%, Dennis confirmed. Not enough for outright control, but sufficient to influence major decisions. And the Chong acquisition? Proceeding as planned. They'll announce their purchase of Stafford's Asian divisions next week, at 30 cents on the dollar. Victor entered with fresh intelligence. The Greenwich property is showing unusual activity. Security personnel, vehicle movements. They appear to be consolidating assets. Not unexpected, Dominic replied. They're circling the wagons. What about our source inside the house? Olivia reports that Gilbert has been making calls to political connections. He's trying to leverage relationships to pressure the SEC. Dominic had placed Olivia Mercer in the Stafford household 3 years earlier, officially as a part-time event coordinator, unofficially as his eyes and ears. The Staffords had never suspected the quiet, efficient woman who organized their parties was reporting their every move. The Rockland Holdings transfer is complete, Theo announced, looking up from his computer. We now control the financing on Gilbert's primary estate and yacht. The balloon payment comes due next month. Dominic stood, walking to the map display. It's time to accelerate. The longer they have to maneuver, the more desperate they'll become. He turned to Victor. Activate the media protocol. Victor nodded grimly. Are you sure? Once this starts. They cross the line, Dominic interrupted. Now they learn what that means. By noon, financial news channels were reporting a new development. An anonymous whistleblower had provided evidence suggesting Gilbert Stafford and Preston Winters had engaged in a years-long pattern of financial manipulation, including client fund misappropriation and tax evasion. The Justice Department confirmed an investigation was underway. At 3 o'clock, Dominic's phone rang, Bianca's number. He answered, putting it on speaker for the team. "You have to stop this," she said immediately, her voice shaking. "Dad's lawyer says he could face criminal charges." "This is going too far." "Is it?" Dominic asked calmly. "You and your father were quite prepared to destroy my reputation, my career, and my life. Why should I show restraint when you showed none?" "Because this isn't you," she pleaded. "The Dominic I knew." "The Dominic you knew was a carefully crafted persona," he interrupted, "created specifically for your benefit. The real Dominic Navarro is someone else entirely." "Then who are you?" she demanded. "The man who's dismantling your world piece by piece." He replied evenly. "The man who warned your father to check what he knew about me before making threats." Her voice hardened suddenly. "You won't get away with this. Dad has connections you can't imagine. People who can make problems disappear, even people like you." "Is that a threat, Bianca?" "It's reality. You've made powerful enemies. Back off now, or you'll regret it." Dominic smiled coldly, though she couldn't see it. "Thank you for confirming what I suspected. Your father has used illicit connections before. I needed that on record." A pause. "What are you talking about?" "This call is being recorded with proper legal authorization as part of an ongoing federal investigation. Your threat will be particularly interesting to the prosecutors." The line went silent for several seconds. "You're bluffing," she finally said, but doubt had crept into her voice. "A familiar refrain from your family," Dominic noted, "yet consistently incorrect. By the way, those connections your father is currently contacting? The ones who make problems disappear? 2 are federal informants. 1 is an undercover agent. Should I continue?" The call ended abruptly. Theo looked up from his monitoring station. "She's calling Gilbert. Their security system just went to high alert. All entries secured, additional guards posted." "As expected," Dominic said. "They'll be looking for external threats now, not internal ones." He turned to Victor. "Is Olivia in position?" "Yes. She has access to Gilbert's home office and private study. Tell her to proceed with document retrieval. Priority on the Cayman accounts and Russian connections." For the next 48 hours, Dominic's team worked methodically, executing a plan years in the making. Financial connections were severed. Business relationships poisoned. The evidence Olivia recovered from Gilbert's private files was devastating, proving connections to money laundering operations tied to Eastern European criminal organizations. On the third day, as Dominic prepared for the final phase, Gilbert's attempt at counterattack came. 3 men in dark suits appeared at Axiom Capital's public offices, claiming to represent a regulatory agency. They demanded access to confidential files and client records. They were met by Dominic's head of security, former FBI agent Samuel Kent, who calmly asked for identification, which proved falsified under ultraviolet examination. When confronted, they retreated, but not before security cameras captured their images. Facial recognition confirms 2 are former intelligence contractors, Maya reported. The third has ties to a private security firm used by the Voznesenski Group. Russian connections, Victor noted grimly. Gilbert's getting desperate. He should be, Dominic replied. The evidence Olivia recovered goes to the Justice Department tomorrow. He studied the surveillance images thoughtfully. They'll try again. Next time, it won't be so obvious. That evening, as predicted, a more sophisticated attempt was made, this time at Dominic's penthouse apartment. 2 professionals bypassed the building's security system and entered his residence. They found Theo waiting for them. The aftermath was quick and efficient. Both men were subdued, disarmed, and their communications equipment confiscated. When they refused to reveal their employer, Theo showed them photographs of their families, a wife picking up a child from school, an elderly mother at a nursing home. "We know everything about you," he said quietly. "You have 2 choices: cooperate fully or face consequences that extend beyond yourselves." They talked. The information led directly back to Gilbert through 3 intermediaries. By morning, Dominic had recordings, transfer records, and sworn statements documenting Gilbert's attempt to have him intimidated, or worse. "We have everything we need," Victor confirmed. The prosecutors are standing by. Dominic nodded, checking his watch. It's time for the final meeting. Chapter 6. The Unraveling. The Stafford family estate in Greenwich stood on 12 manicured acres, a colonial mansion that had hosted politicians, business leaders, and celebrities for decades. Now it had become a fortress. Additional security patrolled the grounds. Access was restricted to a pre-approved list. Yet Dominic walked through the front door unhindered, nodded to by the same guards who had been instructed to keep him out. In the grand living room, he found Gilbert, Bianca, and a visibly agitated Preston. Gilbert's personal attorney, Howard Welch, sat stiffly on a leather chair, legal documents spread before him. "How did you get in here?" Gilbert demanded, rising from his seat. "Your head of security, Mr. Polson, has worked for me for 3 years," Dominic replied calmly, "as have half your household staff." Gilbert's face flushed with rage. "You infiltrated my home? My private life?" "Rather effectively," Dominic agreed, taking a seat without invitation. "Though to be fair, you made it remarkably easy. People who feel unappreciated are surprisingly willing to change allegiances." Bianca's perfect composure had finally cracked. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly. "What do you want from us? Haven't you done enough?" "Enough?" Dominic raised an eyebrow. "I've barely started." He turned to the attorney. "Mr. Welch, I assume you're here to discuss damage control. Let me save you some billable hours. There is no controlling this damage." Welch cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Navarro, my clients are prepared to make significant concessions to resolve this situation amicably. Full divorce settlement on your terms. Control of the relevant portfolio companies. A public statement clearing your professional reputation." "How generous," Dominic said dryly. "And in exchange?" "You cease this vendetta," Gilbert interjected. "You call off the federal investigation. You allow us to salvage what remains of our lives and dignity." Dominic studied each of them in turn. Gilbert's barely contained fury, Bianca's calculated desperation, Preston's pallid fear. These people had plotted to destroy him without hesitation or remorse. They had used him, betrayed him, and when he proved inconvenient, they'd tried to discard him. "There's something none of you have asked," he said finally. "Not once in all this chaos. Not once in your 78 desperate messages." "What's that?" Bianca asked warily. "Why? Why would I marry into a family like yours? Why would I, with all my resources and abilities, subject myself to Gilbert's petty tyranny for 5 years? Why would I build your business, expand your influence, strengthen your position?" The room fell silent. "It wasn't for love, though I admit that became a complication." His gaze lingered on Bianca. "It wasn't for money or connections. I had plenty of both." Gilbert leaned forward. "Then why?" "Because of Thomas and Elizabeth Keller," Dominic said quietly. Gilbert's face remained blank, but a flicker of recognition crossed Welch's features. "Who?" Bianca asked. "My parents," Dominic replied. "Though I was born Dominic Keller. They owned a regional investment firm in the Midwest, small but successful. 23 years ago, they were approached by an aggressive New York firm looking to expand. The negotiations seemed promising at first. Then suddenly, their major clients began leaving. Their reputation was systematically attacked. Financial irregularities appeared in their accounts, irregularities they couldn't explain. Understanding dawned in Gilbert's eyes. "Within 6 months, they were ruined," Dominic continued. "My father had a heart attack under the stress. My mother tried to hold things together, but the damage was too severe. Their firm collapsed. The New York company swooped in and acquired their client base for pennies on the dollar. 3 months later, my mother took her own life. I had nothing to do with that," Gilbert said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Didn't you?" Dominic asked softly. "Stafford Acquisitions, 2002. You personally led the negotiations. When they resisted your initial offer, you initiated what you called aggressive competitive tactics. It's all documented in your private files." "That was business," Gilbert protested. "Nothing personal." "It became personal when both my parents died," Dominic replied, his voice ice cold. "It became very personal when I found myself an orphan at 18 because of your ruthlessness." Bianca stared at him in shock. "You married me for revenge?" "I married you to understand," Dominic corrected. "To learn how men like your father operate. to see inside the machinery of destruction you've all become so comfortable wielding against others. He looked directly at Gilbert. And yes, eventually, to dismantle that machinery piece by piece. You're insane, Preston blurted. No, I'm methodical, Dominic replied. Everything that's happening now was set in motion years ago. The offshore account investigations, the client relationship transitions, the strategic positioning of key personnel. I've been preparing for this moment since before I met any of you. Gilbert seemed to physically shrink. What happens now? Now, Dominic stood. Now federal agents are currently executing search warrants at all Stafford Holdings offices. They're seizing computers, files, and records related to the offshore accounts and Russian connections. Similar warrants are being executed at your other properties. He checked his watch. They should be arriving here within 20 minutes. Welch looked stricken. This is persecution. We'll fight it. With what resources? Dominic asked mildly. Stafford Holdings stock has lost 60% of its value. Your clients are fleeing. Your assets are frozen. Your reputation is in tatters. He turned to Preston. And your star financial mind has his own legal troubles to contend with. You've destroyed everything, Bianca whispered. No, Dominic corrected. I've merely ensured consequences for your actions, past and present. You tried to destroy me without a second thought. Did you really believe I would simply accept that fate? The sound of vehicles approaching interrupted their conversation. Through the window, they could see black SUVs with federal markings entering the property. One last thing, Dominic said, reaching into his jacket. He placed a small flash drive on the table. This contains evidence that might mitigate some of the charges against you, Bianca. Not all, but some. Whether you use it is your choice. Her eyes narrowed. Why would you give me this? Because despite everything, there was a time when I believed in us, he replied simply. Consider it a final acknowledgement of what might have been. He walked to the door as federal agents approached the house. This won't bring your parents back, Gilbert called after him, a final desperate jab. Dominic paused. No, it won't. But it will ensure that you never do to another family what you did to mine. He looked back one last time. Goodbye, Gilbert. Goodbye, Bianca. As he walked away, he could hear the agents announcing themselves at the door, the beginning of the end for the Stafford Empire. 5 years of careful planning, of patient positioning, had culminated in this moment. It didn't feel like triumph. It didn't even feel like justice. But it felt like completion. In his car, Theo waited with the engine running. All done. Yes, Dominic replied, looking back at the house as agents led the Staffords out to waiting vehicles. It's done. What now? Theo asked. Dominic considered the question. For so long, his life had been defined by this mission, this need to understand and ultimately dismantle the forces that had destroyed his family. Now that it was accomplished, what remained? Now we rebuild, he said finally. There are other families out there suffering because of people like Gilbert. Other lives being destroyed by those who see people as disposable assets. A new mission? Theo asked with a slight smile. Something like that, Dominic agreed. Something better. As they drove away, Dominic didn't look back again. The past was finally settled. The future, a future free from the weight of old grievances, waited ahead. Chapter 7. Desperate Measures. 2 weeks passed. The Stafford case dominated financial news, with each day bringing new revelations about the scope of corruption within what had once been a respected institution. Gilbert and Preston remained in federal custody, denied bail due to flight risk. Bianca, released on house arrest with an ankle monitor, was confined to a modest apartment, all her assets frozen pending investigation. Dominic watched these developments from his newly established headquarters in a Manhattan skyscraper. Axiom Capital had emerged from the shadows, suddenly recognized as a major player in international finance. Business publications scrambled to profile the mysterious Dominic Navarro, or Keller, as some now called him, whose vendetta against Gilbert Stafford had exposed one of the decade's most significant financial scandals. The Justice Department wants another meeting, Victor reported, entering Dominic's office with a tablet. They're building their RICO case against Gilbert and have additional questions about the Russian connections. Dominic nodded, reviewing market data on his screen. Schedule it for Thursday. What's the status on the Stafford Holdings transition? The interim board is stabilizing operations. They've approached us about acquiring the European division at a significant discount. Decline, Dominic said. Let Chong take it. They have better regulatory standing in those markets. Victor hesitated. There's something else. Bianca has been trying to contact you through multiple channels. Her attorney, mutual acquaintances, even attempted to approach Theo yesterday. Dominic's expression remained neutral. For what purpose? She claims to have information you'll want, something not in Gilbert's files, something she kept secret even from him. A desperation play, Dominic concluded. She's facing financial ruin and potential criminal charges. She'll say anything that might give her leverage. Possibly, Victor acknowledged. But our sources indicate she's been making unusual movements within her restricted parameters. Multiple visits to a safety deposit box at First National. Late-night calls to untraceable numbers. The monitoring team thinks it's significant. Dominic considered this. What's your assessment? I think she's holding something back. Something valuable enough that she believes it gives her a bargaining position. Or dangerous enough to serve as insurance, Dominic mused. Very well. Have Maya vet a meeting location. Full security protocols, recording equipment. I'll give her 15 minutes. The meeting was arranged for the following day at a neutral location, a private room in an upscale Manhattan restaurant. Dominic arrived early, allowing his security team to sweep the space for surveillance devices or other threats. Bianca arrived exactly on time, escorted by federal marshals who remained outside the door. She looked diminished, her designer wardrobe replaced by simple business attire, her jewelry conspicuously absent, dark circles under her eyes despite careful makeup. Yet she carried herself with the same practiced grace Dominic had once admired. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, taking a seat across from him. "Victor said you have information I'd find valuable," Dominic replied, not bothering with pleasantries. "You have 15 minutes. She studied him for a moment. "You've won completely, you know. Dad will likely die in prison. Preston is negotiating a plea deal that will still mean years behind bars. Everything the Stafford name represented is destroyed. Your point? My point is that you've achieved your goal. Revenge for your parents. Justice for what happened to them. Whatever you want to call it. Again, your point?" Bianca leaned forward. "There's something you don't know. Something that could change everything." "I've heard that phrase before," Dominic noted dryly. Usually preceding an attempted manipulation. She reached into her purse and produced a small USB drive, placing it on the table between them. "This contains information about your parents' case that wasn't in my father's files. Information he didn't know I had." "And how did you acquire this mysterious information?" Dominic asked skeptically. "From my mother," Bianca replied. "Before she died, she gave me a key to a safety deposit box with instructions to use the contents only in the most desperate circumstances." She gestured to the drive. "This is a copy of what I found there 3 years ago." Dominic made no move to take it. "And you're only mentioning this now. I didn't understand its significance until recently. Until everything fell apart and I started connecting the dots." She pushed the drive closer to him. "It proves my father wasn't solely responsible for what happened to your parents. He was acting on behalf of someone else, someone who remains untouched by all of this." "Who?" "Bradford Whitley." The name hung in the air between them. Bradford Whitley, billionaire investor, philanthropist, and longtime friend of the Stafford family. A man whose reputation for integrity seemed unimpeachable. "That's absurd," Dominic said flatly. "Whitley had no connection to your father's business in 2002. "Not officially," Bianca agreed. "But he financed the Stafford Acquisitions division through a series of shell companies. He personally selected targets for hostile takeovers, including your parents' firm. My father was essentially his instrument." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "And I'm supposed to believe this based on what? Your word? Convenient evidence that appears just as you're facing criminal charges?" "I'm not asking for leniency," Bianca said, surprising him. "What I did to you was unforgivable. I deserve whatever consequences come. But Whitley is still out there, still destroying lives the same way he destroyed your parents. Don't you want the complete truth?" "The truth," Dominic repeated. "Suddenly that matters to you?" She looked down. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but this isn't about me anymore. It's about finishing what you started." She stood to leave. "The choice is yours. Examine the evidence or don't. My 15 minutes are up." As she reached the door, Dominic called after her. "Why, Bianca? After everything, why give me this now?" She turned, and for the first time since he'd known her, her expression seemed entirely genuine. "Because in the midst of all our lies, there was one truth. I did love you once. And the man I love deserves to know who really killed his parents. After she left, Dominic studied the USB drive for several long minutes before finally picking it up. Have Maya analyze this, he instructed Victor, who had been monitoring from an adjacent room. Triple isolation protocols. If it contains malware, I want to know before we access any files. You think it's a trap? I think Bianca is fighting for her life, Dominic replied. People in that position rarely act from altruism. 6 hours later, Maya confirmed the drive was clean. The files it contained were explosive, emails, financial records, and recorded conversations documenting Bradford Whitley's involvement in a series of predatory acquisitions spanning 2 decades. The Keller case featured prominently, with specific instructions from Whitley to Gilbert about how to systematically dismantle the family business. It's genuine, Maya concluded after exhaustive authentication procedures. These communications match others we've recovered from Gilbert's archives. The voice recordings are consistent with both Gilbert and Whitley's speech patterns. The financial trails align with known transactions. Dominic studied the evidence silently, his expression unreadable. What do you want to do? Victor asked. Verify independently, Dominic decided. No action based solely on information Bianca provided. I want confirmation from sources Whitley doesn't know we can access. For the next week, Dominic's team worked methodically, tracing financial connections and communications that might corroborate Bianca's evidence. They found disturbing patterns. Dozens of regional financial firms systematically destroyed over 2 decades, all ultimately benefiting Whitley's hidden investment vehicles. It's worse than we thought, Theo reported. Whitley didn't just target your parents. He's created a fortune by destroying small financial firms across the country. At least 16 families like yours, ruined completely. Dominic's jaw tightened. And no one connected the dots? The relationships were buried under layers of shell companies and proxy investments, Maya explained. Without knowing where to look, it would be nearly impossible to see the pattern. And now? Victor asked. Dominic stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. Now we expand the mission. Gilbert was a symptom. Whitley is the disease. Whitley has powerful connections, Victor cautioned. Political allies, friends and intelligence agencies. He won't be as easy to topple as Gilbert. Good, Dominic said coldly. I was beginning to think this had been too easy. The next day, Dominic received an unexpected call from Bianca's federal monitor. She had disappeared during the night, somehow disabling her ankle bracelet without triggering alerts. A manhunt was underway. She knew, Dominic realized. She gave us the Whitley information knowing he'd discover her betrayal. She's running from him, not the authorities. Should we help find her? Theo asked. Dominic considered the question. Despite everything, Bianca had given him the truth about his parents, a truth he might never have discovered otherwise. Find her before Whitley does, he decided. But keep her location compartmentalized. I don't want anyone outside our core team knowing where she is. As his team began the search for Bianca, Dominic turned his attention to Bradford Whitley, the true architect of his parents' destruction. The man who had remained in the shadows while Gilbert took the fall. The real enemy had finally been identified. Now it was time for the final phase of a revenge 23 years in the making. Chapter 8. Ghosts from the Past. Bradford Whitley's 70th birthday celebration was the social event of the season. Held at his palatial estate in the Hamptons, the gathering included political leaders, finance titans, and celebrities, all paying homage to a man widely respected for his business acumen and philanthropy. None of them knew that Dominic's team had the entire property under surveillance, with operatives posing as catering staff, security personnel, and even guests. From his command center in Manhattan, Dominic watched the festivities through multiple camera feeds. Our source confirms Whitley received the package, Maya reported. His security team is examining it now. Earlier that day, a messenger had delivered a small box to Whitley's office, containing nothing but a flash drive and a note with 2 words, I know. He's leaving the main ballroom, Theo observed, tracking Whitley's movement through the mansion, heading to his private study with his head of security. Dominic watched as the elderly but still imposing Whitley dismissed his security detail outside the study door, then entered alone. Once inside, Whitley inserted the flash drive into his computer, exactly as Dominic had anticipated. The drive contained a single video file. When Whitley opened it, He found himself looking at Dominic's face. "Good evening, Mr. Whitley." The recording began. "We haven't been formally introduced. My name is Dominic Keller, though you knew my parents as Thomas and Elizabeth." On the surveillance feed, Whitley's expression shifted from confusion to shock. "Yes, those Kellers," the recording continued. "The family whose business you destroyed in 2002 through your proxy, Gilbert Stafford. I'm sure you've been following Gilbert's recent troubles in the news. What you may not realize is that those troubles were orchestrated by me as the first phase in a project that has now expanded to include you." Whitley reached for his phone, but hesitated as Dominic's recorded voice continued. "You're wondering how much I know. The answer is everything. The 16 regional firms you systematically dismantled. The family's ruined. The 3 suicides directly attributable to your predatory tactics. The Russian money you've been laundering through your philanthropic foundation for the past decade." Whitley's face paled visibly. At this moment, dossiers containing this information are being delivered to the offices of the FBI, the SEC, and the federal prosecutors already handling the Stafford case. Similar packages are being sent to the editorial offices of major financial publications. Dominic watched Whitley closely through the surveillance feed. The man was visibly shaken but not yet broken. However, the recording continued. "There is an alternative. In exactly 1 hour, you will receive a call on your private line. If you wish to discuss options that might mitigate the public dimensions of this situation, you will answer that call. If not, I wish you luck with what follows." The video ended. Whitley sat motionless for several moments before suddenly slamming his fist on the desk and reaching for his secure phone. "He's calling his crisis team," Theo reported, monitoring the communication, demanding immediate verification of the claims in the video. "Right on schedule," Dominic nodded. "How long before his people confirm? Given what we've seeded in their systems? 40 minutes. Maybe less." "And Bianca?" "Secure at the Montana location," Maya confirmed. "No digital footprint, no trail. She's completely off the grid." Dominic had located Bianca 3 days earlier, finding her hiding in a motel outside Philadelphia. Rather than turning her over to authorities, he'd offered her a choice: cooperate fully with his operation against Whitley in exchange for protection, or take her chances alone. She had chosen cooperation, providing additional details about Whitley's operations that had proven invaluable. Exactly 1 hour after Whitley viewed the video, Dominic called his private line. "You have my attention, Mr. Keller," Whitley answered, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Though I must say, your approach lacks subtlety." "Subtlety is a luxury for those with time to spare," Dominic replied. "You've already had your people confirm the authenticity of my information, so let's not waste time with denials." A brief silence. "What do you want?" "Justice." "How melodramatic," Whitley scoffed. "If it's money you're after, name your price. Everyone has one." "My parents didn't," Dominic countered. "That's why you had to destroy them instead of buying them." Another pause. "Business is rarely personal, Mr. Keller. Your parents were simply obstacles to a larger objective. And now you're an obstacle to mine," Dominic said coldly. "How does it feel, knowing your entire legacy is about to collapse?" "You're overestimating your position," Whitley replied, confidence returning to his voice. "I've weathered far worse threats than yours. Do you really think I've survived 6 decades in finance without contingency plans? Without friends and places you can't touch?" "I'm counting on those friends," Dominic said. "In fact, I've prepared special packages for each of them: Senator Hargrove, Director Collins at the Bureau, Judge Westmoreland. Comprehensive documentation of their involvement in your schemes. Tell me, how loyal will they remain when their own freedom is at stake?" The silence that followed told Dominic he'd struck home. "You can destroy me," Whitley finally said, his voice lower. "But consider the collateral damage. Thousands of employees, charitable foundations that depend on my contributions, pension funds invested in my companies. Are you prepared for that kind of widespread impact?" "An appeal to collateral damage," Dominic noted, "from the man who watched my mother take her own life without a flicker of remorse. Your concern for others is noted but not persuasive. What do you propose?" Whitley asked bluntly. "Meet me tomorrow. The location will be sent to you 1 hour before. Come alone. Any security personnel will trigger immediate release of all materials to the press. And if I agree to this meeting, then I'll present terms that might allow you to end your life in something other than disgrace and prison." Whitley's breathing was audible through the phone. You're very confident for someone who didn't exist in my awareness a week ago. I've been preparing for this moment for 23 years, Mr. Whitley. Your awareness was irrelevant. After ending the call, Dominic turned to his team. He'll try to locate us through the call. Standard countermeasures. Already implemented, Theo confirmed. The signal was bounced through 17 relays. They'll trace it to a server farm in Singapore. He'll also activate his own intelligence assets, Victor warned. We should assume surveillance attempts, possibly even wet teams if he feels cornered enough. Let him try, Dominic said. We've been ghosts for years. One more day won't be a problem. The meeting location Dominic selected had symbolic significance, a small, abandoned bank building in the Midwest that had once housed the regional headquarters of Keller Financial Services. The building stood empty now, a silent testament to the destruction Whitley had orchestrated 2 decades earlier. Dominic arrived 6 hours before the scheduled meeting, allowing his team to secure the location and establish surveillance of all approach routes. By the time Whitley's car appeared on the horizon, they were ready. True to instructions, Whitley came alone, though Dominic's team had detected and neutralized 3 separate surveillance teams positioned along potential escape routes. The elderly financier emerged from his luxury sedan looking uncharacteristically vulnerable without his usual entourage. Inside the dusty main floor of the bank, Dominic waited at a small table, the only furniture in the otherwise empty space. Sunlight filtered through dirty windows, illuminating dancing dust particles. The symbolic weight of the location was not lost on Whitley, whose eyes took in the faded sign still visible on one wall. Keller Financial. Building your future together. Theatrical, Whitley commented, taking the seat across from Dominic. I suppose I should appreciate the symmetry. This is where my father had his heart attack, Dominic said quietly. Right where you're sitting now. After his 3rd meeting with Gilbert Stafford, when he realized everything he'd built was being systematically dismantled. Whitley's expression remained neutral. The finance industry has always been Darwinian, Mr. Keller. The strong survive. The weak don't. Is that how you justify it? Evolutionary inevitability. I don't need to justify sound business decisions, Whitley replied. But we're not here to debate ethics. You mentioned terms. Dominic placed a document on the table between them. Complete divestiture of all your holdings. Immediate resignation from all boards and positions. A public confession detailing your methods and victims over the past 30 years. Financial restitution to the families you've destroyed, starting with $50 million to each identified victim family. Whitley didn't touch the document. That's not a negotiation. It's a surrender. It's an alternative to what you deserve, Dominic countered. The families of those who committed suicide because of you might prefer more permanent consequences. And if I refuse? Dominic retrieved his phone, holding it where Whitley could see the screen. A messaging app opened to a conversation with the simple text, "Proceed," ready to send. Then within 30 minutes, every major news outlet will receive evidence of your crimes. Within 60 minutes, federal agents will arrive at your home with search warrants. And within 24 hours, your name will become synonymous with corruption. Whitley studied Dominic's face, searching for weakness or hesitation. Finding none, he leaned back in his chair. You know, in some ways, I admire what you've accomplished, he said finally. The patience, the planning, the execution. In another life, you might have made an excellent protege. I would rather die, Dominic replied evenly. Whitley nodded slowly. Yes, I suppose you would. He glanced at the document again. Before I give you my answer, I have a question. What happened to Gilbert's daughter? Bianca, I believe. Why do you ask? Professional curiosity. My sources tell me she disappeared shortly after providing you with evidence against me. I find the timing interesting. Dominic's expression revealed nothing. Her whereabouts are not your concern. On the contrary, Whitley said, leaning forward slightly. You see, Bianca isn't just Gilbert's daughter. She's my goddaughter. I've known her since birth, guided her education, helped shape her worldview. A thin smile crossed his lips. Who do you think suggested she pursue you after your initial meeting with Gilbert? Who provided the detailed psychological profile that helped her become exactly the kind of woman you would fall for? The revelation landed like a physical blow, though Dominic's face remained impassive. You're saying Bianca was part of your operation from the beginning, he said flatly. Not consciously, Whitley clarified. She knew I had an interest in you, but not why. Gilbert didn't know about our connection to your family either. That detail I kept to myself. Insurance, you might say, against exactly this kind of situation. You're lying, Dominic said, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Whitley's smile widened slightly. Am I? Ask yourself. How convenient was your meeting with Gilbert? How quickly did Bianca take an interest in you? Did you never wonder why a woman with her background would be attracted to someone like you? Talented, certainly, but lacking the pedigree she'd been raised to value. Dominic remained silent, mentally reviewing the early days of his relationship with Bianca, the seemingly chance encounters, her unexpected interest, the whirlwind romance that had accelerated his insertion into the Stafford organization. This changes nothing, he said finally. Your manipulation may have extended further than I realized, but the end result remains the same. You will sign this agreement, or you will face the consequences. Whitley studied him for a long moment. You know what truly separated your parents from other targets? They refused to compromise their principles, even when facing complete ruin. Gilbert offered them a way out, a lesser role in the merged company, a comfortable retirement. They refused. He shook his head slightly. Pride is a dangerous quality in our business, Mr. Keller. It blinds one to pragmatic solutions. Sign the document, Dominic repeated, his voice hardening. Whitley sighed, then reached for the papers. You've won this round. I'll sign your agreement, with one condition. You're not in a position to make conditions. Hear me out, Whitley insisted. I sign everything. I pay everything. I confess everything. But you grant me 6 months before the confession goes public. Time to put my affairs in order. To prepare my family for what's coming. Dominic considered this. 3 months. Not a day more. And during that time, you'll be under constant surveillance. Any attempt to undermine our agreement voids it immediately. Acceptable, Whitley nodded, picking up the pen Dominic provided. As he watched his decades-long enemy sign away his empire, Dominic should have felt triumph. Instead, he felt a growing unease about Whitley's revelations regarding Bianca. Had his entire relationship, his marriage, been merely another layer of manipulation? After Whitley departed, Theo emerged from a back room where he'd been monitoring the conversation. You believe what he said about Bianca? He asked. It doesn't matter, Dominic replied. The outcome is the same. But as they left the building, Dominic couldn't help glancing back at the faded sign bearing his family name. For the first time since beginning his mission of vengeance, he questioned whether true closure was possible, or whether some wounds remained beyond healing, regardless of how complete the victory. Chapter 9. The Inheritance of Vengeance. 3 months passed with surprising tranquility. Bradford Whitley complied meticulously with every term of their agreement, divesting his holdings, resigning from positions of influence, and preparing detailed confessions of his decades of financial predation. Gilbert Stafford and Preston Winters remained in federal custody, their trials proceeding with mounting evidence of widespread corruption. And Bianca, secured in a remote property Dominic owned in Montana, had become an unexpectedly valuable asset, providing insights into Whitley's operations that helped ensure his compliance. In his Manhattan office, Dominic reviewed the final preparations for Whitley's public confession, scheduled for release the following day. The major outlets have been primed, Maya reported. They'll run simultaneous stories across all platforms. Social media strategy is in place to manage the narrative. And the victim families? Dominic asked. All 16 have been contacted discreetly, Victor confirmed. Financial restitution has been arranged through anonymous trusts. They'll learn the source when the news breaks. Theo entered with a secure tablet. The Montana property just checked in. All secure. Dominic nodded, his mind once again returning to Whitley's revelation about Bianca. Despite his best efforts to dismiss it as a desperate lie, the possibility that his entire marriage had been orchestrated as part of Whitley's manipulation continued to haunt him. I need to see her, he decided abruptly. Before tomorrow's announcement. Is that wise? Victor asked cautiously. Your history with her is precisely why I need clarity, Dominic interrupted. Have the jet ready in an hour. The Montana property stood in splendid isolation, a modernist structure of glass and stone nestled against a backdrop of mountains. As Dominic's car approached, he noted the subtle security measures integrated into the landscape. Motion sensors disguised as decorative lighting, surveillance cameras concealed within the architecture. Inside, He found Bianca in the main living area, reading beside a massive stone fireplace. She looked up as he entered, surprise briefly crossing her features before she composed herself. "I didn't expect you," she said, setting aside her book. "Evidently," Dominic replied, taking a seat across from her. "Tomorrow, Whitley's confession goes public. Everything ends." She nodded slowly. "And what happens to me afterward?" "That depends," Dominic said, studying her face. "On whether you're finally willing to tell me the complete truth. I've told you everything about Whitley's operations." "Not about that," he interrupted. "About us. About how we began." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "He told you that you were part of his plan from the beginning?" "Yes. What I need to know is whether any of it was real." Bianca looked away, toward the mountains visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. For a long moment, she said nothing. "Bradford is my godfather," she finally acknowledged. "He's been a presence in my life since childhood. When you first met my father, Bradford called me afterward. He said you were someone special, someone with remarkable potential who might be valuable to the family business." "Did he tell you why he was interested in me specifically?" "No," she said, meeting his gaze again. "He simply suggested I get to know you. Said someone with your talents should be brought into the fold rather than left as a potential competitor." "And you followed his suggestion without question?" A flash of anger crossed her face. "I was raised to respect Bradford's business instincts. My father consulted him on every major decision. When he showed interest in a potential partner, we listened. So our entire relationship was a business arrangement," Dominic stated flatly. "It didn't start that way," Bianca admitted. "But," she hesitated. "But what?" "But it wasn't supposed to become a marriage," she finished quietly. "That was my decision, not his. Not my father's. When I told Bradford I wanted to marry you, he seemed genuinely surprised." Dominic absorbed this, searching her face for deception. "Why did you decide to marry me, then?" She looked away again. "Because for the first time in my life, I'd met someone who didn't care about my family name or connections. Someone who saw me as more than a Stafford. Someone who challenged me." Her voice softened. "And yes, I did love you, Dominic. Whatever else was false, that was real. Until Preston returned," Dominic noted. "Yes," she acknowledged. "Until Preston. Until I realized I'd grown tired of being challenged. Of your intensity. Of feeling like I was never quite enough." She met his gaze directly. "I made my choice, and it was the wrong one. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise." "And the evidence against Whitley? Why give that to me?" "Because by then, I'd realized what kind of men my father and Bradford truly were," she replied. "How they used people, including me, as pawns in their games. The evidence was my mother's insurance policy. She knew, Dominic. She knew what they had done to your family and others. She couldn't stop it, but she preserved the truth." Dominic considered this. "You could have used that evidence as a bargaining chip with prosecutors. Reduced your own charges." "I could have," she agreed. "But I gave it to you instead. Make of that what you will." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of their shared past hanging between them. "What happens to me tomorrow?" she finally asked again. "The federal authorities will be notified of your location," Dominic replied. "They'll take you into custody pending trial. With your cooperation against Whitley, you'll likely receive a reduced sentence." She nodded, accepting this without protest. "And us? Is there any path to forgiveness?" Dominic stood, moving to the window. The mountains stood impassive and eternal against the darkening sky, unmoved by human concerns, untroubled by questions of betrayal or vengeance. "Forgiveness isn't in my nature," he said finally. "Not for the kind of betrayal you orchestrated. Not for the partnership you formed with Preston against me. Not for the humiliation you planned at my birthday party." He turned to face her. "Actions have consequences, Bianca. Yours have led you here." She met his gaze steadily. "And yours? Where have your actions led you, Dominic? Now that you've destroyed everyone who hurt your family, what remains?" The question struck deeper than he expected. For 23 years, his life had been defined by a single purpose: understanding and ultimately dismantling the forces that had destroyed his parents. Now, with that mission nearly complete, what would define his future? "Something better," he said, echoing the words he'd spoken to Theo months earlier. "Something more than revenge." "I hope you find it," she said softly. Truly, as Dominic drove away from the property, he found himself reflecting on the long journey that had brought him to this point. The orphan boy who had joined the military seeking structure. the special operations soldier who had learned to compartmentalize emotion, the finance professional who had meticulously constructed a new identity, the husband who had discovered betrayal, the avenger who had dismantled an empire. Each version of himself had served a purpose, advancing him toward his ultimate goal. But who would he become now that the goal was achieved? The following morning, Bradford Whitley's confession was released to the press. The financial world reeled from revelations about one of its most respected figures. The 16 families who had been destroyed by his predatory tactics received not only financial restitution, but public vindication. Justice, delayed but not denied, was finally served. Dominic watched the coverage from his office, surrounded by his core team. "It's done," Victor said quietly. "After all these years." Dominic nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The Whitley phase is done. The Stafford phase is done. But there are others like them out there. Other families being destroyed by powerful people who believe themselves beyond accountability." "A new mission?" Theo asked. "A better purpose," Dominic corrected. "My parents built their business to help people secure their futures, to protect what they'd worked for. In the end, there was no one to protect them." He turned to his team. "But we can protect others." Over the following year, Axiom Capital transformed, shifting from traditional investment services to specialized operations targeting predatory financial practices. Dominic's team, with their unique combination of intelligence backgrounds and financial expertise, became formidable advocates for victims of corporate predation. Gilbert Stafford received a 20-year sentence for financial crimes, effectively a life sentence at his age. Preston Winters, in exchange for testimony, received 12 years. Bianca, benefiting from her cooperation against Whitley, was sentenced to 5 years, eligible for parole after 3. Bradford Whitley, true to the agreement, surrendered his empire and fortune. 6 months after his public confession, he was found dead in his substantially reduced home, an apparent suicide, though rumors persisted of connections to Russian entities unhappy with his cooperation with authorities. On the anniversary of his parents' deaths, Dominic visited their graves for the first time in years. The small Midwestern cemetery was peaceful, far removed from the financial battlefields where he had waged his campaign of vengeance. As he placed flowers on their shared headstone, he felt a sense of completion, not the cold satisfaction of revenge accomplished, but the warmer recognition of justice served. "It's done," he told them quietly. "The people who destroyed you have faced consequences. Your name has been cleared." He paused, feeling the weight of 2 decades of single-minded purpose lifting gradually. "I'm building something new now. Something worthy of your legacy." On his way back to the airport, Dominic received a call from Victor. "The Reynolds family in Seattle," Victor reported without preamble. "Small investment firm being systematically targeted by Meridian Global. Classic predatory tactics. They've reached out through our new foundation. Investigate thoroughly," Dominic instructed. "If it's confirmed, prepare a full response strategy." "Already in progress," Victor confirmed. "This one feels familiar." "Then we know exactly what to do," Dominic replied, a sense of purpose settling over him. Different from the cold determination of vengeance, closer to the principled resolve his parents had embodied. The inheritance of vengeance had served its purpose, clearing the path for something better to take root. Not forgiveness, some wounds went too deep for that, but perhaps, at last, a way forward that honored what had been lost without being defined solely by its absence. As his plane lifted into the clear autumn sky, Dominic Navarro, once Dominic Keller, looked not backward toward the graves of his parents, but forward toward a future where their true legacy might finally be realized. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.